I've spent enough years watching folks to know one thing for certain. Loneliness doesn't always look the way you expect. Sometimes it wears work boots and fixes fences at dawn. Sometimes it eats supper alone at a table built for two. And every now and then, it opens a door it swore to keep shut. Not because it wanted to, but because something out in the rain refused to ask for help. The sound came first. Not thunder. Something heavier. Wood grinding against wet earth. The rhythm of effort without rest. Ethan set down his coffee cup and listened. The cabin had been quiet for 6 years, every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the gaps. He knew them all. This was different. He crossed to the window. Rain fell in thick sheets, turning the red dirt road into a river of mud. And there, 50 yards out, a figure. A woman. Shoulders hunched forward, both hands gripping the handles of a wooden cart. Her boots sliding backward with every pull. She wasn't calling for help. That's what stopped him. Most people shouted when they were stuck. She just kept pulling. Steady, silent. Like someone who'd learned a long time ago that no one was coming. Ethan's hand moved to the door latch before his mind caught up. If this opening stirred something quiet in you, I'd be grateful to hear where you're watching from today. And if you've been enjoying these stories without subscribing, consider joining us. It means more than you know. Rain hit his face before he finished stepping off the porch. Cold. Harder than he expected. The drops struck like small stones, soaking through his shirt in seconds. Ethan walked anyway. His boots sank into the mud with each step ankle deep by the time he reached the road. The woman didn't stop pulling. Up close, he could see her hands. Red. Swollen at the knuckles. The rope handles of the cart had worn grooves into her palms. Her dress, brown calico, maybe, hard to tell now, clung heavy with water. She was a big woman. Strong shoulders. But even strong shoulders had limits. Hey. She didn't look up. Another pull. The cart lurched forward an inch, then slid back 2. Ethan grabbed the side of the cart. The wood was slick, rough cut. He could feel splinters pressing into his palm. He pushed as she pulled. The wheel groaned. Mud sucked at it like something hungry. Then a pop. The cart jerked free. The woman stumbled forward. Caught herself. Stood there breathing hard, rain running down her face, dripping off her chin. Now she looked at him. No fear, no gratitude. Just eyes brown, flat, tired meeting his for the first time. The eyes of someone who'd stopped expecting anything from anyone. Get inside. Ethan jerked his head toward the cabin. This rain won't quit for hours. She didn't argue, didn't thank him, just gripped the cart handles again and started pulling toward the porch. He walked beside her, one hand still on the cart, steadying it over the ruts. Under the overhang, they stopped. Water pooled around their boots. The woman stood there, arms hanging, chest still heaving. Ethan pushed open the cabin door. Warm air drifted out, the smell of coffee gone cold, wood smoke, dust, and something stale underneath. The smell of a place where only one person breathed. She stepped inside, stopped just past the threshold, stood in the corner like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. Water dripped from her hem onto the floorboards. She didn't sit. Ethan looked at the chair across from his, the one with dust on the seat, the one Martha used to pull close to the fire on winter evenings. His throat tightened. Sit, he said. The word came out rougher than he meant. She looked at the chair, then at him. Something shifted behind those flat brown eyes. Lost recognition. He couldn't tell. She sat, and Ethan realized he had no idea what came next. She sat there dripping. Ethan stood by the door, water pooling around his own boots, watching her. The woman hadn't moved since she lowered herself into the chair. Her hands rested on her thighs, palms up. The rope burns visible even in the low light. She stared at the floor. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers. The cabin was cooling. Ethan crossed to the woodpile, grabbed 2 split logs, and fed them into the belly of the cast iron. Sparks rose. The wood caught. Heat began to push back against the damp. When he turned around, the woman was looking at the stove, then at him, then at the Dutch oven hanging on its hook by the chimney. She raised one hand, pointed at the pot, raised her eyebrows. Ethan understood, and he nodded. She stood, moved toward the door. He thought for a moment she was leaving lost recognition. He couldn't tell, but she stepped outside, into the rain still hammering the porch roof, and went to her cart. He watched through the window as she lifted the canvas cover and pulled out a burlap sack. Small, not heavy. She came back inside, water streaming fresh down her face, and set the sack on the table. 3 potatoes, 1 onion, the skin papery and brown, a chunk of salt pork wrapped in cloth, no bigger than his fist. Not much. But she handled it like it was enough. She moved to the wash basin first. Ethan watched her pump the handle twice, let the cold water run over her palms. The rope burns must have stung. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't make a sound. She scrubbed her hands with the lye soap, dried them on the rag hanging from the nail, and turned back to the table. She didn't ask where the knife was. She found it the paring knife with the worn wooden handle lost recognition. He couldn't tell in the drawer by the wash basin. She didn't ask about salt. She opened 2 cupboards, found the earthenware jar with the cork lid, and set it beside the cutting board. Ethan sat in his chair by the window, the chair he always sat in. He watched her work. The onion came apart under her hands. Quick, precise cuts. No wasted motion. She scraped the pieces into the Dutch oven with the flat of the blade, then reached for the potatoes. Her fingers moved like they remembered something her mind didn't need to think about. Peel. Quarter. Drop. The salt pork went in last. Diced into small cubes that would render down and flavor the broth. She found the water bucket by the door. Poured enough to cover. Set the pot on the stove. Adjusted the damper. Then she stood back and waited. As she waited, her eyes moved around the cabin, the blanket folded on the bed, the boots lined up by the door, the single plate drying on the rack. They stopped on the shelf above the wash basin, on the photograph frame sitting there, face down. Its back to the room. She looked at it for a long moment, then looked away. The cabin began to change. It started slow, a wisp of steam rising from the pot. The first hint of onion in the air sharp, then sweet as it softened. The salt pork began to sizzle. Fat melted into the water, turning it cloudy, rich. The smell spread outward, filling the corners of the room, pressing into the walls, the curtains, the blankets on the bed. Ethan breathed in. His chest tightened. Not pain. Something else. Something older. The smell of food cooking, The smell of someone cooking for him? He hadn't realized how much the cabin had smelled like nothing like dust and cold coffee and his own unwashed clothes until now. The woman stirred the pot with the long-handled oak spoon. She didn't look at him. Her back was straight, her movements steady. Rain drummed on the roof. The fire crackled. The pot bubbled. When it was ready, she ladled soup into 2 bowls. Blue-rimmed enamelware. Ethan hadn't used the second bowl in 6 years. He'd kept it in the cupboard, behind the first one, where he didn't have to see it. She set one bowl in front of him, sat down across the table with the other. The chair creaked under her weight, the chair where Martha used to sit, where Sarah used to climb up and demand to be fed. Ethan picked up his spoon. The metal was warm from sitting near the stove. He dipped it into the broth, raised it to his mouth. The soup was simple: potato, onion, salt pork. Nothing fancy. But the warmth spread down his throat and into his chest, and something behind his ribs loosened a knot he hadn't known was there. He swallowed, took another bite. His hand trembled. He set the spoon down, picked up the bowl instead, drank from the rim. The woman ate slowly, methodical. She didn't watch him, but she was aware of him. He could tell by the way she held herself, shoulders slightly turned, ready to move if needed. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was lower than he expected, rough at the edges, like she hadn't used it much lately. "For letting me wait out the rain." Ethan's mouth was full. He swallowed. Silence. The rain outside had softened to a steady hiss. The fire popped. "You live alone?" she asked, not prying, just filling the quiet. "Yep." More silence. Longer this time. She finished her soup, set the bowl down, and folded her hands on the table. "Me too," she said. Ethan looked at her, at the raw hands, the tired eyes, the way she sat so still, like someone who'd learned to make herself small. He thought about the chair she was sitting in, about the last person who'd sat there, about the 6 years of dust he'd let gather on the seat because he couldn't bring himself to wipe it clean. She was here now, a stranger, sitting where Martha sat, and he didn't want her to leave. The thought came unbidden, sharp as a slap. He set down his bowl, stared at the table. "More?" she asked, already reaching for the ladle. He nodded, didn't trust his voice. She filled his bowl again. The steam rose between them. Outside, the rain kept falling, and Ethan realized, with a feeling like cold water down his spine, that he'd let someone through a door he'd sworn to keep shut. There was no closing it now. Whatever came next, whatever she was running from, whatever brought her down this forgotten road with a cart full of pots and nothing else, he was part of it now. He lifted his spoon. The soup tasted different the second time. Not better, not worse, just not alone. Then she looked up at him, and her eyes held something he hadn't seen before. A question. Or maybe a decision she hadn't made yet. "The rain might stop by morning," she said. Ethan heard what she wasn't saying. And then what? Ethan woke to a sound he didn't recognize. Sweeping. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying to place it. The soft shush of bristles against wood. Rhythmic. Steady. Coming from the main room. Then the smell hit him. Coffee. Fresh coffee. Not the stale dregs he usually reheated from the day before. And something else, cornmeal batter sizzling in a pan. He sat up. The blanket fell away from his chest. His boots were beside the bed where he'd left them. still caked with dried mud from yesterday. Through the gap in the curtain that separated his sleeping area from the rest of the cabin, he could see movement, a shadow passing back and forth. She was still here. Ethan pulled on his boots, not bothering with the laces, and pushed through the curtain. The cabin looked different. The floor, he noticed at first, clean. Actually clean. The layer of dust and grit he'd stopped seeing years ago was gone. The boards showed their grain again, pale and smooth where the broom had passed. The woman stood by the stove, her back to him, turning something in the cast-iron skillet. The broom leaned against the wall by the door. She heard him. Didn't turn around. "Coffee's on the table," she said. Ethan looked at the table. A tin cup sat there. Steam rising. Beside it, a plate with 2 corn cakes, golden at the edges. The butter dish, when had he last used the butter dish, sat open nearby. He sat down, picked up the cup. The coffee was strong, almost too strong, the way Martha used to make it before he drank. The heat burned his tongue. He didn't care. The woman brought the skillet to the table and slid 2 more corn cakes onto his plate. Then she sat across from him with her own cup, her own plate. They ate in silence. The rain had softened overnight but hadn't stopped. A gray drizzle fell past the window, turning the world outside into a wash of mud and mesquite. "Still raining," she said. "Yep." She took a bite of corn cake, chewed, swallowed. "I reckon I could stay until it stops. If that's all right." Ethan looked at his plate, at the food she'd made from his supplies, at the clean floor, at the cabin that already felt less like a tomb. It's all right. By midday, the rain had thinned to a mist, but the clouds hung low and heavy, promising more. Ethan climbed the ladder he kept leaning against the north wall and pulled himself onto the roof. 3 cedar shingles had come loose in the last storm, or maybe the storm before that. He'd been meaning to fix them. He knelt on the damp wood, hammer in one hand, nails clenched between his teeth. Below, he could hear her moving. The splash of water, the scrape of metal against metal. He looked down. She had dragged the zinc washtub out from under the porch and filled it from the rain barrel. Now she stood over it, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing something against the washboard. One of his shirts, he realized. The gray one with the torn collar he'd been wearing for 2 weeks. She hadn't asked permission. Ethan turned back to the shingles, positioned the first one, drove a nail through it 1 strike, 2, 3. The sound echoed off the low clouds. He moved to the next shingle, hammered, moved again. Below, the rhythm of her scrubbing continued, back and forth, back and forth. He found himself matching his hammer strikes to her pace. When he climbed down, she was hanging his shirts on the line strung between 2 mesquite posts. The fabric hung limp in the still air. She'd made lye soap somewhere he could smell it, sharp and clean, cutting through the wet earth smell of the day. "Didn't ask you to do that," he said. She wrung out another shirt, hung it beside the first. "Didn't ask you to let me stay, either." Ethan stood there, hammer dangling from his hand. She didn't look at him, just kept working. He walked toward the barn. There was work to do there too. The door had been sagging on its hinges for months, and inside, Martha's things still sat where he'd put them after the funeral. The big 6-burner stove she'd wanted for when they had more children, the cradle he'd built with his own hands, boxes of clothes and linens he couldn't bring himself to open or throw away. He stopped at the barn door, didn't go in. Instead, he turned and walked back to the cabin. The evening came slow, the light draining out of the sky like water through sand. The rain had finally stopped, but the air was thick, humid, pressing against the skin. Ethan sat on the porch steps, his back against the post, watching the clouds break apart to show the first stars. She came out and sat on the other end of the porch, not close, not far, just there. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The crickets started up. A nightjar called somewhere in the brush. You ever wonder why I was pulling that cart alone? Ethan picked at a splinter in the porch rail. Nope. Why not? He stopped picking, looked at her. She was staring out at the darkening land, her profile sharp against the fading light. Because I don't want anyone asking why I'm alone. She turned her head. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, not understanding. Exactly. Recognition. Fair enough, she said. The nightjar called again. Ethan pulled the splinter free, flicked it into the dirt. I had a restaurant, she said. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. In Santa Fe, cooked for 50 people a day, breakfast, dinner, supper, 7 days a week. She paused. Her hand moved to her skirt, fingers pinching the fabric, twisting it. Then I didn't. Ethan waited. She didn't explain further. He didn't ask. Life's like that, he said. She made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Reckon it is. The stars multiplied above them. The air cooled. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped once and fell silent. Ethan heard his own voice before he decided to speak. I had a wife, a daughter. The words came out dry, cracked, like they'd been sitting in a drawer for years. Scarlet fever. Summer of '79. He didn't say their names. Couldn't. Not yet. She didn't say she was sorry didn't offer comfort. Just sat there, her hands still now, her eyes on the horizon. What was the restaurant called? He asked. Clara's? Ethan nodded. Clara. That's my name. He realized he hadn't known, hadn't asked. She'd been in his cabin for a day and a night, and he hadn't asked her name. Ethan, he said. She nodded, as if she'd known already. The dark settled over them. The porch boards creaked as she shifted her weight. He could smell the lye soap on her skin, the wood smoke in her hair. The rain will be gone by morning, she said. Probably. I should go. Probably. Neither of them moved. The night deepened. Somewhere inside the cabin, the fire popped and settled. Ethan looked at the empty road, the one that led back to Mineral Wells, the one that led to everywhere else. She would take that road tomorrow, pull her cart down the ruts and disappear into whatever came next, and he would be alone again. The thought sat in his stomach like a stone. Where would you go? He asked. Clara's hands twisted the fabric of her skirt again. Twist, release, twist. I don't know. The coyote called again, closer now. Ethan listened to it, to the echo fading into the brush. You could stay? The words hung in the air. He didn't look at her. Didn't dare. Until you figure it out, he added. If you want. Silence. Long, heavy. Then her voice, low and careful. Why? Ethan stared at the stars, at the road, at his own hands, rough and empty. Because that chair inside, he stopped, swallowed. It's been empty too long? He heard her breathing, slow, measured. The sound of someone deciding. "All right," she said finally. "Until I figure it out?" Ethan nodded. Didn't trust himself to say more. They sat there as the night grew cold around them. Two people who had stopped expecting anything, stumbling into something neither of them could name. And in the morning, Ethan would wake to the sound of sweeping again and realize he'd stopped counting the days since he'd felt like someone worth staying for. But that was tomorrow. Tonight? A question hung in the dark between them. Unspoken but sharp. How long before the past came looking for her? A week passed. Ethan stopped counting the mornings he woke to the smell of coffee already made. Stopped noticing the way the floorboards no longer crunched with grit beneath his boots. Stopped being surprised when he came inside and found the table wiped clean, the dishes stacked, the curtains pulled back to let in light he'd forgotten existed. Clara moved through the cabin, like water finding its level. She didn't rearrange things, not exactly. She just filled the empty spaces. The corner by the stove became her territory cutting board, knife, the row of tin canisters she'd unpacked from her cart and lined up in order of size. The wash basin stayed where it had always been. But now there was a folded cloth beside it, changed daily. The wood box by the door was never empty. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Mornings. Ethan worked outside. The fence posts that had been leaning for 2 years suddenly seemed worth straightening. The barn door that had sagged on its hinges, he found the tools to fix it. The well rope that had been fraying, he replaced it with new hemp from the supply shed behind the barn, where Martha's old stove still sat under a canvas tarp. He worked harder than he had in years. Came inside with his shirt dark with sweat, his hands raw from the shovel handle. Clara would have water waiting, food on the table. She never commented on how much he'd done or asked what he was doing next. They ate together, washed dishes together, him drying, her scrubbing. Then the evening would settle in, and they'd sit on the porch or by the fire, and the silence between them would stretch out comfortable and warm. On the 5th day, she laughed. Ethan had been trying to fix the leg of the kitchen table. One of the dowels had worked loose over the years, and the whole thing wobbled every time someone set a plate down too hard. He'd crawled underneath with a mallet and a jar of wood glue, wedging himself into the narrow space. When his elbow caught the leg and the whole table shifted, the flour canister Clara had been measuring out flour for biscuits lost recognition. He couldn't tell savez, but lost recognition he couldn't tell tipped over. A white cloud erupted across the table, the floor, and Clara herself. She stood there, flour in her hair, flour on her eyelashes, flour coating the front of her apron. A dusting of it clung to her upper lip like a pale mustache when Ethan scrambled out from under the table, saw her, opened his mouth to apologize. She sneezed. The sneeze sent another puff of flour into the air. It hung there, suspended in the slant of afternoon light from the window, drifting down like snow. And Clara laughed. It started low, a rumble in her chest, then broke free, full and loud, filling the cabin. Her shoulders shook. Her eyes squeezed shut. She bent forward, one hand on the table edge, and laughed until she had to gasp for breath. Ethan stared at her. His mouth twitched. Then the corner lifted. Then lost recognition. He couldn't tell. He laughed. The sound startled him. Rusty, unused, like a door hinge that hadn't been oiled in years. But it came anyway, pushing up from somewhere deep, somewhere he'd locked away and forgotten. They stood there in the flour-dusted kitchen, laughing at nothing and everything, until their eyes watered and their stomachs ached. Clara wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a white streak across her cheek. "Look at me," she said. "I look like a ghost." Ethan picked up the flour canister, righted it on the table. His chest still shook with the aftershocks. "Best-looking ghost in Texas," he said. She threw a dish towel at him. He caught it. They grinned at each other across the ruined biscuit-making, and something shifted between them. Not romantic. Not quite. But a door, somewhere, had opened another inch. The next morning, Ethan found her standing by the shelf where the photograph sat. She wasn't touching it, just looking. The frame faced outward now he'd turned it around the night of the storm. Without thinking about it. Without meaning anything by it. Martha's face looked out at the room. Sarah sat on her lap. That serious expression she always wore when she had to sit still. "Your wife?" Clara asked. "Yeah." She was beautiful. Ethan came to stand beside her. Not close. Just near enough to see what she was seeing. She was... "And the little one, your daughter?" "Sarah." The name came easier than he expected. "She was 4. Would have turned 5 that September." Clara was quiet. Her hand rose, almost touched the frame, then fell back to her side. "What happened?" "Scarlet fever. Swept through the whole territory that summer. Took half the children in mineral wells." He paused. "Took Martha, too. She stayed up nursing Sarah for 6 days straight. Wouldn't let anyone else near her. By the time Sarah..." He stopped, swallowed. "By then, Martha was already sick. She went 3 days later." The cabin was silent except for the pop of the fire. "I'm sorry," Clara said. Not the way most people said it, that hollow, automatic phrase that meant nothing. She said it like she understood what it cost to keep breathing after the people you breathed for were gone. "It was 6 years ago," Ethan said. "Some days it feels like yesterday. Some days it feels like it happened to someone else." Clara nodded. She understood that too. "You never left," she said. It wasn't a question. "Where would I go?" He looked at the photograph, at Martha's eyes that seemed to follow him no matter where he stood. "This was our place, hers and mine. Built it with my own hands the year we got married. Dug the well, raised the walls, set every shingle on that roof." His jaw tightened. Leaving felt like saying they didn't matter, like I could just walk away and start over somewhere else. "So you stayed." "So I stayed." Clara turned away from the photograph, walked to the window. The morning light caught the angles of her face, the shadows under her eyes. "The man who took my restaurant," she said. "His name was Marcus Hale. We were partners, or I thought we were. I did the cooking. He handled the money, the supplies, the books." She folded her arms across her chest. "Turns out he was also handling the debts. Put everything in my name. The loans, the back taxes, all of it. When the bank came calling, I was the one on the papers. He was already gone." Ethan watched her, the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her fingers dug into her own arms. They took the restaurant, everything. The building, the equipment, even my recipes. He'd written them down and sold them to another cook in Albuquerque before he disappeared. Her voice stayed flat, controlled. I walked out with the clothes on my back and whatever I could fit in that cart. And you've been walking ever since? 3 months. She turned to face him. I don't know where I'm going. Ethan, I don't know what I'm doing. I had one thing I was good at. One thing that was mine. And he took it. Ethan thought about that. About building something with your hands? About watching it burn down, or worse, watching someone else take it from you piece by piece. You could build it again, he said. She looked at him. Those flat brown eyes weren't flat anymore. Something flickered there. Doubt. Maybe. Or the first small ember of something else. Where? Ethan didn't answer. Not directly. But his eyes moved around the cabin, the space by the window, the empty corner near the stove, the porch that looked out over the road. Clara followed his gaze. Her brow furrowed. Here. Why not? He shrugged. Road runs right past. Used to be a trading route before the railroad went through mineral wells. Still get travelers sometimes. Ranchers coming up from the south. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, you're serious? I ain't much for jokes. Clara stared at him. At the cabin. At the road visible through the window. I'd need supplies, equipment, tables and chairs. She shook her head. I've got nothing. Ethan. No money? No. I've got some saved. Not much, but enough to start small. Why would you do that? Ethan picked up his coffee cup, took a long drink. The coffee had gone cold. Because I'm tired of this place being a tomb, he said. And you're the first person in 6 years who made it feel like something else. Clara didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The road stretched empty toward the horizon, brown and rutted and waiting. Neither of them heard the hoofbeats. Not yet. Not until 3 days later, when a buggy with black-painted wheels would come rolling up that road, carrying a man in a silk vest who knew Clara's name. But that morning, in the cabin that smelled of coffee and wood smoke and something like hope, they sat at the wobbling table and began to plan. They started with the porch. Ethan stood back and looked at it. Really looked at it for the first time in years. The boards were weathered gray, warped in places where the rain had pooled and sat. 2 of the posts leaned inward, their bases soft with rot. The railing had gaps where spindles had broken off and never been replaced. It'll need work, he said. Clara stood beside him, arms folded, studying the structure with a cook's practical eye. Everything needs work. Question is whether it's worth the trouble. Is it? She didn't answer right away. Her gaze moved from the porch to the road, measuring the distance, the angle of approach, the way a traveler would see this place coming around the bend. 4 tables, she said finally. 2 inside, 2 on the porch. Simple menu soup, bread, whatever meat we can get, coffee, maybe pie if I can get enough sugar. Ethan nodded. Old Pete comes by every 2 weeks with supplies. I can add to the order. We'll need chairs. A proper stove, that one inside, is fine for 2 people. But if we're cooking for travelers, there's a bigger one in the barn. Cast iron. 6-burner. Came with the place when I bought it. He paused. Martha wanted it for when we had more children. Never got the chance to set it up. Clara turned to look at him. You sure you want to bring it out? Ethan looked toward the barn. The door still sagged, even after he'd fixed the hinges. Inside, under a canvas tarp gone stiff with dust, sat the stove Martha had picked out from the catalog. The one she'd circled in pencil and shown him with that smile she had when she wanted something. It's been sitting there 6 years, he said. Reckon it's time it did what it was meant to do. They spent 2 days hauling it out. The stove weighed more than both of them combined 400 pounds of cast iron and enamel, an Acme Charter oak that had cost more than Ethan made in 3 months of ranch work. He rigged a system of planks and rope, rolling it inch by inch across the barn floor while Clara guided from behind. The first day, they got it to the barn door. The second day, they wrestled it across the yard and up the porch steps, using the mule and every ounce of strength they had between them. By the time they got it into position by the kitchen wall, the sun had dropped below the tree line. Sweat had soaked through both their shirts. Clara's hair had come loose from its pins. Ethan's back ached in places he'd forgotten existed. They stood there, breathing hard, looking at the stove sitting in its new home. Tomorrow, Ethan said. We'll run the stovepipe through the roof tomorrow. Clara wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. Tomorrow. That night, they ate cold beans and stale bread because neither of them had the energy to cook. They sat on the porch steps, plates balanced on their knees, watching the stars come out one by one. Folks are going to talk, Ethan said. Clara spooned beans into her mouth, chewed, swallowed. Let them. Small town. They ain't got nothing better to do. I've been talked about before. She set her plate down. Called worse than whatever they'll come up with here. Ethan looked at her profile in the fading light. The strong jaw. The way she held her shoulders squared, ready. Doesn't bother you? What bothers me is being hungry, being cold, having nowhere to go. She picked up her plate again. Words are just air. Old Pete arrived the next morning with the regular supply run. His wagon creaked up the road just past dawn, the old mule plodding along at its usual pace. Pete pulled up short when he saw the activity Ethan on the roof, fitting the new stovepipe through the hole he'd cut. Clara below handing up tools and sealing clay. Pete sat there for a long moment, jaw working on a plug of tobacco, eyes moving from Ethan to Clara to the pile of lumber stacked by the porch. Well, he said finally, this is different. Ethan climbed down the ladder, wiping his hands on his trousers. Need to add to the order. Pete. I can see that. Pete's eyes moved to Clara, who was wiping her hands on her apron. She's staying. She's staying? Pete chewed, spat, chewed some more. Folks in town are going to have opinions. Folks in town can keep their opinions to themselves. Pete almost smiled a twitch at the corner of his mouth that came and went. Fair enough. What do you need? Ethan handed him the list. Pete looked it over, his eyebrows climbing higher with each item. 50 pounds of flour, 20 pounds of sugar, 10 pounds of coffee. He looked up. You opening a store? Something like that. Pete folded the list and tucked it into his vest pocket. I'll see what I can do. Might take an extra week for some of this. That's fine. Pete climbed back onto his wagon, gathered the reins, then paused. Ethan? Yeah. It's good to see you doing something. He clicked his tongue, and the mule started forward. Martha would have liked that. The wagon rolled away down the rutted road. Ethan stood there watching until it disappeared around the bend. The days blurred together in a haze of sawdust and sweat. Ethan tore out the rotted porch boards and replaced them with fresh-cut pine from the stack behind the barn. Clara scrubbed the big stove until the black enamel gleamed, then watched as he fitted the last joint of stovepipe and sealed it tight. They worked from dawn until dark, stopping only to eat and rest. On the third evening, they sat at the kitchen table with paper spread between them. Clara had drawn a rough layout of the cabin, the kitchen area, the main room, the porch. She'd marked where the tables would go, where customers would enter, where she would set up the serving station. "We need a sign," she said. "I can make one. Got some pine boards that would work." What would it say?" Ethan looked at her across the table. The lamp cast warm shadows across her face, softening the hard lines around her mouth and eyes. "Your restaurant," he said. "Your name." Clara's hand stilled on the paper. "Clara's Kitchen. Unless you want something else." She was quiet for a long moment. Her fingers traced the edge of the drawing, following the lines she'd made. "I never had my name on anything before," she said. "The restaurant in Santa Fe, it was called the Desert Rose. Marcus chose it. Said it sounded more elegant than just me." Marcus was a fool. The words came out harder than Ethan intended. Clara looked up, something flickering in her eyes. "You don't know him. I know he took what was yours and left you with nothing. That's enough." Clara's jaw tightened, then relaxed. She looked back down at the drawing. "Clara's Kitchen," she said. "I reckon I liked the sound of it." They worked past dark that night, measuring and planning and talking in a way they hadn't before. Clara told him about the dishes she used to make green chile stew, sopapillas with honey, carne adobada that simmered for hours until the meat fell apart at the touch of a fork. Ethan listened, asking questions, watching her hands move as she described the techniques her mother had taught her. "You miss it," he said. "Every day." She set down her pencil. "Cooking for one person for myself, it ain't the same. The food tastes different when there's no one to share it with." Ethan understood. He thought about the hundreds of meals he'd eaten alone in this cabin, tasting nothing, just shoveling fuel into his body to keep it moving. "That's going to change," he said. Clara met his eyes. Something passed between them. Not a promise. Exactly. More like an agreement. A recognition that they were building something together. Whatever it turned out to be. "I should get some sleep," she said. "Lots to do tomorrow." She stood, gathered the papers, and moved toward the corner where she'd set up her bedroll. At the curtain, she paused. "Ethan." "Yeah. Thank you. For all of this." He nodded. Didn't trust himself to say more. She disappeared behind the curtain. He sat there in the lamplight, listening to the sounds of her settling in the rustle of blankets, the creak of the floorboards, then silence. Outside, the night was still. No wind, no coyotes, just the vast quiet of the empty land. Ethan reached for the lamp to turn it down and stopped. Hoofbeats. Distant at first, then closer. Not old Pete's mule, this was faster. The rhythm of a horse at a steady trot. And beneath it, the faint rattle of wheels, a buggy, coming up the road. At this hour, Ethan moved to the window, peered into the darkness. He couldn't see anything yet, but the sound was growing louder, clearer. Behind him, the curtain rustled. Clara's voice, tight with something he hadn't heard before. "Ethan, who else knows I'm here?" He turned. She stood in the gap of the curtain, her face pale in the lamplight, her hands gripping the fabric so hard her knuckles had gone white. "Just old Pete," he said. "And who does old Pete talk to?" The hoofbeats grew louder. A shape emerged from the darkness at the end of the road, a black buggy, its lanterns unlit, rolling toward the cabin like something out of a bad dream. Clara's hand found the door frame, gripped it. "He found me," she whispered. The buggy rolled to a stop at the edge of the porch. Ethan stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame. The horse was a fine animal, a bay gelding with a glossy coat that caught the moonlight. The buggy itself was black lacquered wood with brass fittings, the kind of rig that belonged on city streets, not rutted Texas back roads. The man who stepped down from the seat didn't belong here either. Silk vest, black with silver threading, watch chain gleaming gold across his belly, shoes polished to a mirror shine, though they wouldn't stay that way long in this dirt. He was shorter than Ethan expected, with a soft middle and hands that had never held a tool. "Evening," the man said. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone who talked for a living. "I'm looking for a woman, name of Clara. Was told she might be in these parts." Behind Ethan, he heard Clara's sharp intake of breath, the rustle of fabric as she stepped back into the shadows. "Who's asking?" Ethan said. The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Marcus Hale, old friend of hers?" He took a step toward the porch. "You must be the fellow who's been putting her up. Pete in town mentioned it when I asked around." Ethan didn't move. "It's late. Mr. Hale." "That it is? Long ride from Santa Fe." Marcus looked past Ethan's shoulder, scanning the interior of the cabin. "Clara, I know you're in there. We need to talk." Silence. Then the sound of footsteps. Clara emerged from behind Ethan, her face pale but composed. She stopped just inside the doorway, arms crossed tight against her chest. "Marcus." "Clara?" He spread his hands, palms up, the gesture of a man with nothing to hide. "You're a hard woman to find. 3 months I've been looking. Maybe I didn't want to be found." "I understand. After everything that happened, I understand why you'd feel that way." He took another step forward. His shoe sank into the soft dirt. He glanced down, frowned, then looked back up. "But I'm here to make things right." Clara's arms tightened. "Right. The restaurant's failing. Clara, without you, it's nothing. The new cook, he doesn't know what he's doing. Customers stopped coming. I'm 3 months behind on the lease." Marcus's voice dropped, softened. "I made mistakes. I know that. But I'm asking you to come back. As head chef. Full partner this time, your name on the papers. Everything legal and proper." Ethan watched Clara's face. Something flickered there, a muscle in her jaw, a slight widening of her eyes. "Full partner," she said. 50-50. I'll put it in writing tonight if you want. And the debts, the ones you put in my name." Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I can talk to the bank, explain the situation, get your name cleared." "You can talk to them." Clara's voice was flat. "Like you talked to me when you said we were building something together? Like you talked to me when you said the books were fine? Everything was fine. Don't worry about the details. Clara, you put $12,000 of debt in my name. Marcus, $12,000. I walked out of that restaurant with nothing. Not a penny. Not a pot to cook in. Nothing." Marcus held up his hands. I know. And I'm sorry. That's why I'm here to fix it. To give you back what I took." Ethan shifted his weight. The floorboard creaked under his boot. Marcus's eyes moved to him, sized him up, found him lacking. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Marcus said. "You are?" "The man who didn't invite you here." A flicker of something crossed Marcus's face. Irritation, quickly suppressed. "I appreciate you looking after Clara, but this is between her and me. Business matters." "Looked to me like you handled the business just fine on your own." Marcus's smile thinned. He turned back to Clara. "Can we talk privately? I've come a long way." Clara stood frozen in the doorway. Her hands had dropped to her sides, fingers curled into loose fists. She stared at Marcus like she was seeing a ghost, or maybe seeing the person she used to be, the one who trusted him. "5 minutes," she said. "Outside." She walked past Ethan without looking at him. Down the porch steps. Marcus followed, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. Ethan stayed in the doorway, watched them walk to the edge of the porch light's reach, where the darkness started. They stood facing each other, Clara with her arms wrapped around herself, Marcus with his hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels. Their voices came in fragments, Marcus doing most of the talking, Clara responding in short, clipped phrases. Then Marcus said something Ethan couldn't hear and Clara's posture changed. Her shoulders dropped. Her head bowed. Marcus reached out and touched her arm. Clara jerked away. The movement threw her off balance. Her foot caught on a root, or maybe just on the uneven ground, and she went down, hard, on her hands and knees, in the mud that still hadn't dried from last week's rain. Marcus stepped back, hands raised. "Clara, I didn't—" She pushed herself up. Mud caked her palms, her dress, her knees. She wiped her hands on her skirt, leaving dark streaks, but the mud wouldn't come off. It was in the fabric now, ground in. She stood there in the dark, covered in filth, and Ethan saw her face clearly in the light from the cabin window. Not anger, not sadness, shame. The look of a woman who'd let herself believe, just for a second, that the man who'd ruined her might actually have changed. And the knowledge written in the slump of her shoulders, the way she couldn't meet anyone's eyes, that she'd been a fool to even listen. Marcus was still talking, apologizing, reaching for her again. Ethan walked down the porch steps. "That's enough." Marcus turned. "Now listen here. You've said what you came to say." Ethan stopped between them, facing Marcus. The lady fell. "She's covered in mud. Time for you to go." "I'll leave when Clara tells me to leave." Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. "I'm telling you." The two men stood there in the dark. Marcus's jaw worked. His eyes calculated odds, measured risks. He was city soft, and Ethan was range hardened, and they both knew how any confrontation would end. Marcus stepped back. "I'll be at the hotel in Mineral Wells," he said, loud enough for Clara to hear. 2 days. Think about my offer. It's the best one you're going to get." He walked to his buggy, climbed up, took the reins. "You know where to find me, Clara," he called. "When you're ready to stop playing house and get back to real life." The buggy rolled away into the darkness. The sound of hoofbeats faded. Silence returned. Ethan turned. Clara hadn't moved. She stood in the same spot, mud drying on her skin, on her clothes. Her hands hung at her sides, palms still smeared with dirt. She was staring at the ground. "Clara." She didn't answer. Ethan walked to her, stopped an arm's length away. "Let's get you cleaned up." "Don't." Her voice cracked on the word. "Just don't." She walked past him. Not toward the cabin, toward her cart, still sitting where she'd left it under the overhang by the barn. She started pulling things out. A blanket, a tin cup, the sack of cookware. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. "Packing." "Clara, he's right." She stuffed the blanket into the cart. Her movements were jerky, uncoordinated. "This is foolish. Playing house, that's exactly what this is. You don't need me here. You were fine before I came." "I wasn't fine." "Then you'll learn to be." She grabbed the tin cup, threw it into the cart. It landed with a clang. "I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere. I'm just dragging my mess from place to place and making it everyone else's problem." Ethan watched her tear apart the small life she'd started building. The mud was still on her face. A streak of it ran down her cheek, like a dark tear. He walked into the cabin, to the shelf, to the photograph. His hand closed around the frame. The wood was smooth, familiar. He hadn't touched it in 6 years. Hadn't been able to look at their faces without feeling like his chest was caving in. He carried it outside, set it on the porch railing, facing outward where Clara could see it. She stopped packing, stared at the photograph. Martha's face, Sarah's face, frozen in time. "They're why I stayed," Ethan said. "And they're why I stopped living. For 6 years, I've been keeping this place like a shrine. Like if I changed anything, it would mean they never existed." Clara's hands had fallen still. "Then you showed up," he continued, "covered in mud, pulling a cart full of nothing, and you made soup. And the cabin smelled like food again. And I remembered what it felt like to not be alone." He stepped closer to her. "I ain't asking you to stay for me, Ma. I'm asking you to decide for yourself. Not because Marcus is offering you something, not because you've got nowhere else to go. Because you want to be here or you don't." Clara looked at the photograph, at the cabin, at the cart half full of her belongings, at him. "I'm covered in mud," she said. Her voice was small, broken. "So wash up. There's water in the basin. He's going to come back. Let him. He'll tell people. About me. About this. Let him." Clara's chin trembled. Just once. Then she steadied it. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at the photograph of his wife and daughter, the two people who'd taught him what it meant to belong to someone, and what it meant to lose them. "Because you made me remember that I'm still alive," he said. "And I'd rather be alive with you here than dead with you gone." The night stretched silent around them. The stars wheeled overhead. Somewhere in the brush, a coyote called and received no answer. Clara stood in the mud, her clothes ruined, her dignity in tatters, and looked at the man who'd opened his door to a stranger in the rain. Her hand released the handle of the cart, but she didn't step toward the cabin. Not yet. 2 days, she said. "He said he'll be there 2 days." Ethan's stomach tightened. And Clara looked at the road, the dark path that led back to Mineral Wells, to Marcus, to a life that had already chewed her up and spit her out. "And I don't know," she whispered. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat on the porch steps, mud still crusted on her dress, watching the road where Marcus had disappeared. The moon moved across the sky. The stars wheeled. The cold crept in. and she didn't move to get a blanket. Ethan stayed inside. She could hear him moving around the creak of floorboards, the clunk of wood being added to the stove. He didn't come out. Didn't try to talk to her. Just let her be. The night passed in pieces. Fragments of memory surfaced and sank. The restaurant in Santa Fe, the smell of green chilies roasting, the clatter of plates, the steady rhythm of a kitchen running at full capacity. Marcus, in those early days when he'd been charming and attentive and full of promises. The slow realization, month by month, that the books didn't add up. The day the bank man came with papers that had her name on loans she'd never signed. She thought about what it had felt like to stand in front of that bank clerk. The way he'd looked at her, not with anger, but with pity. The way he'd said, "Ma'am, your signature is right here." And she'd looked down and seen her own handwriting, forged so perfectly she almost believed she'd done it herself. That was when she understood what Marcus had really taken from her. Not just the restaurant, not just the money, her name, her word, the thing that made her Clara, and not just another woman with nothing. And now here she was, sitting in the dirt outside a stranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere, with mud drying on her skin and 2 days to decide whether to crawl back to the man who'd ruined her. The sky began to lighten. Gray first, then pink at the edges. The birds started up sparrows in the mesquite, a mockingbird somewhere in the brush. Clara watched the sun rise. She thought about what Marcus had offered. Full partnership, her name on the papers, a chance to cook again, really cook, for 50 people a day. In a proper kitchen with proper equipment, everything she'd lost, handed back to her. All she had to do was trust him. The sun cleared the horizon. Golden light spilled across the land, turning the mud to amber, the mesquite to bronze. Clara looked down at her hands, the rope burns still visible, the calluses from weeks of pulling that cart. She'd built those calluses herself. No one had given them to her. Ethan came out at full sunrise with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Clara without speaking, sat down on the step beside her, leaving a space between them, drank his coffee, and watched the morning spread across the sky. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm tin cup. The heat seeped into her palms, into her bones. "I need to go to Mineral Wells," she said. Ethan's cup paused halfway to his mouth. He lowered it. "All right. I need to talk to him. Face to face." "All right." She turned to look at him. His face was unreadable, the same weathered mask he always wore. But something moved behind his eyes. Something waiting. "You ain't going to try to stop me?" Would it matter if I did? Clara thought about that. About all the times in her life she'd done what other people wanted, what Marcus wanted, what her mother wanted, what the world expected of a woman without money, without family, without options. "No," she said. "It wouldn't." Ethan nodded, drank his coffee. "Then I won't try." She washed the mud off her face and hands, changed into the one clean dress she had left blue calico, faded but presentable, brushed her hair back, and pinned it up. In the small mirror by the wash basin, she studied her reflection, the lines around her eyes, the sun damage on her cheeks, the set of her jaw harder than it used to be, sharper. She didn't look like the woman who'd built a restaurant from nothing. But she didn't look like a victim either. Ethan had the horse saddled by the time she came out. The old mare hadn't been ridden in years. Her coat was rough. Her mane tangled, but she stood patient and calm. "You want me to come with you?" Ethan asked. Clara shook her head. "This is something I have to do alone." He handed her the reins. Their fingers brushed. Neither of them pulled away. "I'll be here," he said. Clara swung up into the saddle. The leather creaked beneath her. The mare shifted, then steadied. She looked down at Ethan, at the cabin behind him, at the porch where they'd sat together, the window where she'd hung new curtains, the big stove visible through the open door. "If I don't come back?" "You'll come back." She didn't ask how he knew. Maybe he didn't. Maybe it was just faith, the irrational kind. The kind that kept people going when everything else had failed. She turned the mare toward the road and kicked her into a walk. Mineral wells sat in a shallow valley 2 hours east. Clara rode in silence, letting the rhythm of the horse's movement settle her thoughts. The land rolled past mesquite and scrub, red dirt and pale grass, the occasional twisted oak reaching for the sky. She thought about what she was going to say, rehearsed the words in her head, discarded them, tried again. The town appeared gradually, first, a water tower on the horizon, then the church steeple, then the scattered buildings along Main Street. Clara guided the mare through the outskirts, past the blacksmith and the general store, toward the hotel at the center of town. Marcus's buggy was parked outside. She dismounted, tied the mare to the hitching post, stood there for a moment, her hand on the warm leather of the saddle, her heart beating too fast. She could still turn around, ride back, forget he existed. But she couldn't. She knew that now. Running hadn't worked. Hiding hadn't worked. The only way out was through. She walked into the hotel. He was in the dining room, eating breakfast, eggs, toast, bacon. The smell of it filled the small room. Marcus sat at a table by the window. A newspaper spread beside his plate, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked up when she entered. His face shifted. Surprise first, then satisfaction at the look of a man who'd been proven right. Clara. He set down his coffee, stood, gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit. Have you eaten?" She didn't sit. "I came to give you my answer." Marcus's smile flickered. He lowered himself back into his chair, slowly, watching her face. "I'm listening." Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together in front of her, fingers interlocking, knuckles white. 3 years ago, you told me we were partners. You told me the restaurant was ours. You told me not to worry about the money side that was your job, and I should focus on what I did best. Clara, I ain't finished. Marcus closed his mouth. I trusted you. I put everything I had into that kitchen every hour, every ounce of energy, every recipe my mother taught me, and you took it. Not just the restaurant, not just the money. You took my name and put it on debts I never agreed to. You made me a criminal in the eyes of the law. Her voice was steady now. The shaking had stopped. You could have just stolen from me. That would have been bad enough. But you made it so I couldn't even be angry at you because on paper, it looked like I'd done it to myself. You made me doubt my own memory, my own mind. Marcus leaned back in his chair. His face had gone careful, calculating. I've apologized for that. I'm trying to make it right. No. You're trying to get me back because your restaurant is failing and you can't cook. That ain't the same thing. 50-50 partnership. Clara, full control of the kitchen. Your name on the door. My name was already on your door. On your loan papers. On your debt notices. She paused. But I reckon you know the bank already sold that debt to a collection outfit in El Paso. They ain't looking for me. They're looking for you. That's the real reason you came, isn't it? You need me to take the fall again. Marcus's face went still. The mask slipped, just for a moment, and she saw the calculation underneath. The cold assessment of a man who'd been caught. That's not... Don't... Clara took a step closer to the table. I may not have much schooling, but I ain't stupid. I talked to the clerk at the land office this morning. He told me everything. She hadn't. But Marcus didn't know that. And the way his eyes widened told her she'd guessed right. You didn't come here to make me a partner. You came here because the debt collectors are closing in and you need someone to hide behind. She straightened her shoulders. Well, it ain't gonna be me. Not anymore. Marcus stood. His chair scraped against the floor. You're making a mistake, Clara. That cabin in the middle of nowhere, that hermit you're shacking up with, that's not a life. That's giving up. Maybe. Clara met his eyes. Or maybe it's starting over. On my own terms. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, the drawing she and Ethan had made. The layout of the cabin, the plans for the kitchen. She set it on the table in front of Marcus. I'm opening a restaurant, a real one. Not yours, mine. Marcus looked at the paper, looked at her. With what money, what equipment? You've got nothing. I've got enough. That hermit out in the sticks, he's your investor. Marcus laughed a short, ugly sound. Clara, listen to yourself. You're throwing away a real opportunity for some fantasy life in a shack with a man you just met. Clara picked up the paper, folded it, put it back in her pocket. Goodbye, Marcus. She turned toward the door. You'll regret this. His voice followed her, sharp with anger now. When you're broke and starving and that cabin falls down around your ears, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember that I offered you everything, and you were too proud to take it. Clara stopped at the door, turned her head not all the way, just enough to speak over her shoulder. I'd rather starve free than eat well under your thumb. She walked out into the sunlight. The ride back felt different. The same land, the same road, the same horse beneath her. But something had shifted inside Clara's chest. A weight she'd been carrying for 3 years or maybe her whole life had lifted. Not all the way, not completely, but enough that she could breathe again. She didn't know if she was making the right choice. Didn't know if the restaurant would work, if the travelers would come, if she and Ethan could build something real out of nothing. But she knew one thing: she'd chosen it herself. No one had told her what to do. No one had rescued her. She'd walked into that hotel, looked Marcus in the eye, and said no. That was hers. No one could take it away. The cabin appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent. Ethan was on the porch. He'd been working sawdust covered his shirt. A hammer rested on the railing beside him. But he was standing still now, watching her ride in. Clara dismounted, led the mare to the water trough, let her drink. Then she walked to the porch. Ethan didn't ask what happened, didn't ask what she'd said. He just looked at her, waiting. Clara climbed the steps, stopped in front of him. I'm staying, she said. Ethan's face didn't change, but something moved in his eyes, a light that hadn't been there before. All right. I want to build this restaurant. For real. Not just talk about it. All right? I don't have any money. I don't have any equipment. I've got nothing but my hands and my recipes. You've got a stove, Ethan said, and a porch, and a road that goes right past the door. Clara looked at the cabin, at the new boards Ethan had been laying, at the space where tables would go. You didn't tell me to stay, she said. Back there, before I left. You didn't try to talk me out of going. Nope. Why not? Ethan picked up his hammer, turned it over in his hands. Because if I'd talked you into staying, you'd have stayed for me, not for yourself. He looked at her. You needed to choose it. On your own. Clara felt her throat tighten. She looked away, toward the road, toward the horizon, where Marcus was probably already heading back to Santa Fe with nothing to show for his trip. What were you, she asked, before you came out here? School teacher, taught reading and arithmetic to farm kids in East Texas. Clara stared at him. You, a teacher? For 12 years. Then why don't you talk more? Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Because I reckon I said enough words for one lifetime, he said. Now I'd rather do things instead. He stepped past her, toward the pile of lumber stacked by the porch railing, picked up a board, measured it against another. How many tables did you say we need? Clara watched him work, the sawdust in his hair, the easy way he moved, sure and steady. 4, she said. 2 inside, 2 on the porch. Ethan nodded, picked up his saw. I'll start tonight. Clara walked into the cabin, found her apron, the white linen one, still folded in the corner where she'd left it. She shook it out, tied it around her waist. The strings cinched tight. The familiar weight of the fabric settled against her hips. She walked to the stove, laid her hand on the cool iron, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt like herself again. But as she reached for the kindling to start the fire, her eyes moved to the shelf above the wash basin, to the photograph of Martha and Sarah, still facing outward, still watching the room. She looked at the 2 faces frozen in time, at the woman Ethan had loved, at the daughter he had lost, and wondered, for the first time, whether building something new meant he was ready to let go of something old, or whether she was just another way for him to hold on. 9 months later, the sign went up. Clara stood in the road, arms folded, squinting against the morning sun. Ethan balanced on the ladder, one hand gripping the post, the other holding the wooden plank steady while he drove the final nail home. The hammer struck twice, 3 times. The sign swung gently, then settled into place. Clara's kitchen. The letters were rough, carved by hand, each one slightly different from the next. Ethan had practiced on scrapboards behind the barn before attempting the real thing, burning the letters into the wood with a heated iron, then rubbing charcoal into the grooves to make them stand out. The effect was uneven, imperfect, real. He climbed down, stood beside her. They both looked at the sign. It's crooked, Clara said. It's got character. She almost smiled. Character. That's what I said. The sun climbed higher. The road stretched empty in both directions, but not for long. Old Pete had spread the word in Mineral Wells. A restaurant on the old trading route, good food, fair prices, worth the ride. Today was the day they'd find out if anyone believed him. The first customer arrived just past noon. Sheriff Burrell came alone, riding a gray mare that had seen better days. He tied her to the post, climbed the porch steps with the careful movement of a man whose knees had started complaining years ago, and stood in the doorway looking around. 2 tables inside, covered with red and white gingham cloth. 2 tables on the porch. A chalkboard menu hung on the wall: soup, bread, coffee, pie. The big stove radiated heat, and the smell of potatoes and onions filled the room. "Well," the sheriff said, "this is different." Ethan emerged from the corner where he'd been stacking firewood. "Sheriff, Ethan." The old man's eyes moved around the room, taking in the changes: the clean floors, the curtains, the woman in the white apron standing by the stove. "Heard you were opening a place. Had to see it for myself." "Have a seat." Sheriff Burrell lowered himself into a chair. The wood creaked under his weight. He picked up the small card on the table. Clara had written out the menu in careful script and studied it. "What's good?" "Everything," Ethan said. "That ain't an answer." Clara approached the table, wiping her hands on her apron. "The soup. Start with the soup." Sheriff Burrell looked up at her. His eyes were sharp, assessing. "You're the cook. I'm the cook. Where'd you learn 'my mother, Santa Fe'?" The sheriff nodded slowly. "All right. Soup it is." Clara went back to the stove. Ethan stood awkwardly by the table, unsure what to do with his hands. He'd never served anyone before, never waited tables. The whole thing felt wrong, too exposed, too visible. He reached for the water pitcher to fill the sheriff's glass. His elbow caught the edge of the table. The pitcher wobbled. Water sloshed over the rim, pooling on the gingham. Ethan grabbed a cloth, mopped it up. His ears burned. "Relax," Sheriff Burrell said. "You look like you're fixin' to face a firing squad." "Feels like it." The sheriff almost laughed, a dry, rusty sound. "Sit down before you fall down. I ain't going anywhere." Ethan sat across from him. The chair creaked. "So," the sheriff said, "this is what you've been doing out here, building a restaurant." "Something like that." "With her?" Ethan looked toward the stove, where Clara was ladling soup into a bowl. Steam rose around her face. "With her?" Sheriff Burrell followed his gaze, watched Clara work, turned back to Ethan. "Martha would have liked this," he said. Quiet, matter of fact. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't trust himself to speak. "She always said you'd waste away out here alone. Said you needed folks around you, someone to cook for." The sheriff shook his head. "She was a smart woman." "She was." Clara brought the soup, set it in front of Sheriff Burrell with a spoon and a thick slice of bread. The bowl was blue-rimmed enamelware, the same kind Ethan hadn't used in 6 years. The sheriff picked up his spoon, dipped it into the soup, raised it to his mouth. He chewed, swallowed, set the spoon down. "That," he said, "is the best soup I've had in 20 years." Clara's face didn't change, but something shifted in her shoulders, a release, a letting go. "There's more if you want it," she said. "I want it." By mid-afternoon, 4 more customers had come. A rancher and his wife from the valley to the south. A traveling salesman with dusty clothes and a sample case full of kitchenware. An old man who didn't say where he was from, just ordered coffee and pie and sat by the window, watching the road. Ethan moved between tables, taking orders, bringing food, refilling cups. He bumped into a chair, nearly dropped a plate, forgot which table had ordered the bread with extra butter, but he kept moving, kept trying. Clara worked the stove like someone conducting music only she could hear. Her hands never stopped stirring, seasoning, plating, wiping down the counter. The kitchen was her territory, and she ruled it with quiet efficiency. The salesman asked for seconds. The rancher's wife wanted the pie recipe. The old man by the window finally spoke, asked if they had rooms to let. "Not yet," Ethan said. "Maybe someday." The old man nodded, finished his coffee, left a coin on the table, and walked out. The family arrived just before sunset. A man, a woman, and a little girl. The father drove a wagon loaded with furniture. They were moving west, he said, looking for land in the territories. The mother looked tired, her dress dusty, her hair coming loose from its pins. The girl was maybe 5 years old, with blonde hair and a serious expression. She reminded Ethan of someone. He stood frozen in the doorway as they climbed down from the wagon. The mother carried the girl on her hip. The father stretched his back, groaning. "This the restaurant Pete told us about?" the father asked. Ethan found his voice. "It is." "Got enough for 3 hungry travelers." "We do." He led them inside, sat them at the table by the window, the best table, the one with the view of the sunset. Clara brought water. The mother set the little girl in a chair, tucking a napkin into her collar. The girl looked around the room with wide eyes, taking everything in. Her gaze landed on Ethan. "Mr. He stopped. "Yeah. Do you have candy?" The question hit him somewhere behind the ribs. Sarah used to ask that every time they went to town, every time they passed the general store. "Papa, do you have candy?" He knelt down, put himself at her eye level. Her face was round, her cheeks pink from the sun. "No candy," he said. His voice came out steady. "But we've got cookies, sugar cookies. Would that do?" The girl considered this, nodded solemnly. "I reckon that'll do." Ethan stood up, went to the kitchen. His hands weren't shaking. His chest didn't hurt. He found the cookie jar Clara had made a batch that morning, just in case, and brought 2 cookies back to the table. Set them on a small plate in front of the girl. "Thank you, mister." "You're welcome." He walked back to the kitchen. Clara was watching him. "You all right?" He thought about it, really thought. "Yeah," he said. "Reckon I am." The evening wound down slowly. The family finished their meal: soup, bread, pie, and 3 cups of coffee. The father paid and left a generous tip. The mother thanked Clara twice, 3 times, for the best meal they'd had in weeks. The little girl waved goodbye from the wagon, her cookie clutched in one hand. Ethan stood on the porch and watched them go. The wagon rolled down the road, growing smaller, disappearing around the bend. The sun touched the horizon. Orange and gold spilled across the sky. Clara came out and stood beside him. She'd untied her apron. Her hair had come loose from its pins. She looked tired, but it was a different kind of tired. The good kind. "How many today?" she asked. 8, plus us." "Not bad for the first day." "Not bad." They stood there in silence, watching the light fade. Sheriff Burrell's words echoed in Ethan's head. Martha would have liked this. He thought about the photograph on the shelf inside, still facing outward, still watching the room. He hadn't put it away, hadn't turned it around, but he'd stopped feeling like a ghost when he looked at it. "Ethan." "Yeah." "Do you regret it? Any of this?" He looked at the sign, at the porch he'd rebuilt, at the road that led to everywhere else. "No." Clara nodded, sat down on the top step. After a moment, Ethan sat beside her. The stars began to emerge, one by one. Then all at once a scattering of light across the darkening sky. The crickets started up. A nightjar called from somewhere in the brush. "She asked if you had candy," Clara said. She did. You gave her cookies. I did. Clara was quiet for a moment. That was kind. Ethan picked at a splinter on the step. She reminded me of Sarah. Just a little. The way she looked at me, that serious face. Did it hurt? He thought about it. The way the question had landed in his chest. The way he'd knelt down to meet her eyes. It used to, he said. Tonight it didn't. Clara didn't say anything, but she shifted slightly, and her shoulder brushed against his. They sat there as the night grew cold around them. The fire crackled inside the cabin. The smell of wood smoke and soup still hung in the air. What did Sheriff Burrell say? Clara asked. Before I brought the soup. He said Martha would have liked this. The restaurant? All of it? Clara looked at the stars. Her hands rested on her knees, palms down. Do you reckon she would have Ethan followed her gaze upward. The evening star hung bright on the horizon, steady and unwavering. Somewhere up there, if you believed in such things, Martha and Sarah were watching. Yeah, he said. I reckon she would. Silence settled over them. Comfortable? Warm? Then Clara spoke again, her voice soft. I don't want tonight to end. Ethan looked at her. At the woman who had stumbled into his life covered in mud and carrying nothing but a cart full of pots. The woman who had cooked soup on his stove and sat in his wife's chair. The woman who had said no to the man who ruined her, not because someone told her to, but because she chose to. It don't have to, he said. She turned to meet his eyes. The lamplight from inside the cabin caught the angles of her face, the lines around her mouth, the tiredness under her eyes, the steadiness in her gaze. What happens tomorrow? Ethan thought about the sign, the tsao, the tables, the stove, the road that led right past the door. Tomorrow we do it again, he said. And the day after that, and the day after that. Clara nodded slowly. Her hand moved loss recognition. He couldn't tell rested on the step between them. Close, but not touching. That sounds all right. Just all right. She almost smiled. Don't push it. Ethan laughed. The sound surprised him, still strange, still new, but easier now than it used to be. They sat on the porch of Clara's kitchen, watching the stars wheel overhead, and let the night stretch on. The road lay empty before them, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like a promise of travelers yet to come, of meals yet to cook, of days yet to share. And when Ethan finally looked up at the sky, at the evening star burning steady above the horizon, he realized something had changed. For the first time in 6 years, he didn't want the night to end, so the pain would stop. He wanted it to last because something good was finally happening. And that, he reckoned, was enough. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this one. Not a lesson, not a message wrapped in ribbon, just a feeling tender, perhaps a little heavy, that settles somewhere behind the ribs and asks for nothing in return. Many of us have known what it is to live inside our own silence, to wake each morning in a house that echoes, to eat alone at a table built for two. Some of us have carried that weight for years, convinced that opening the door would only let in more cold. And perhaps you have also known what it is to meet someone unexpectedly, not a savior, not a solution, just another person, equally worn, equally uncertain, who somehow made the quiet feel less empty. These things do not need to be explained. They do not need to be resolved or understood. They are simply part of being human, the way we stumble toward each other in the dark. The way we sometimes find warmth in the most unlikely places. It is all right to sit with this feeling for a while. It is all right to let it rest. Thank you for staying until the end. It has been good to share this time with you.